But yeah, maybe talking about the breeding birds of Kennebec County tonight, and it's so great to see a lot of people here who are interested in them. And I think I know about half of the room between the Land Trust and the Birding Club and friends and family. So it's so wonderful. Uh, Most of the pictures in here, almost all of them, are pictures that I've taken, and then there's a couple that I didn't that I've noted on the pictures. Uh, One picture I did not take is the gentleman in the lower left hand corner with the great mustache, and as you may have guessed, he's related to the older data that we found. So I'll talk about him later. And uh, as you heard last week from Adrian about the, if you were here, the Maine Bird Atlas, just an incredibly huge and complex effort over a 5-year period with hundreds of people and thousands of hours in the field. And I'm going to be focusing on the Kennebec part of that tonight. So Kennebec County, 128 species of birds were confirmed as breeding in Kennebec County, which is really something you have to think about. Most people know what, like half a dozen birds that come to their feeder, something like that. So that made us number 14th highest in Maine out of 16 counties. So it's all together now. We're in number 14. We're in number 14. So why is that? Why is it fewer here? It's mainly because of the habitat. We're an inland county. We don't have much boreal habitat, so we don't get the coastal and ocean breeding birds and things like boreal chickadee in the lower right there. That took a picture up on Kibbe Mountain with the Augusta Birding Club a few years ago. It was nice enough to drop in to our lunch break at the fire tower on top there. And on top there, those are eiders, common eiders out at Eastern Egg Rock. Most people are taking pictures of puffins, but I'll say pictures of eiders out there. It's not for lack of effort. We weren't the top county. We had over 100 people contribute data specifically to Kennebec County. So I'd like a show of hands. How many people in the room contributed data to the Kennebec County part of the? Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and I know there's a couple more that couldn't be here who did a ton, like Cheryl Wren. So that's 6,500 hours of effort. That's like 3 full-time equivalents. So if one person was to work full-time for 3 years, and this was mostly volunteer effort. And we had data in 100% of our blocks. There's 106 blocks in Kennebec County. Those little blocks that Adrian showed across the state, and I'll show maps here later. This picture here is some people in the room might recognize themselves in. It's not actually Kennebec County, but it was a picture I have of a bunch of birders. That was our Augusta Birding Club trip up Kibbe Mountain last year, where we're all staring at a bay-breasted warbler that was giving really good views there. So back to Kennebec County. I can't go over 120 birds. We'd be here till midnight, and I don't think even people like birds would want to hear that much about it. But I'm going to talk about some of them. These are some of the most common. Yeah, and you probably guess these ones. Robin, turkey, red-winged blackbird, phoebe, song sparrow, Canada goose. But there's some bias with this too. These are the ones that are obvious. They're out there in the open. Red-eyed vireo is probably just as common as these ones, but they're just a lot harder to see. And not only do you need to see the birds, you need to see specific breeding behaviors, like Adrian described last week. And this is one of those specific behaviors. Carrying nesting material is a female red-winged blackbird at Hutchinson Pond, taking some look like dried grass from the marsh for a nest. The map on the left is red-winged blackbird. That was the distribution across the state from the Maine Bird Atlas, and it's basically the same as Adrian was showing for maps, but it's got different colors. So here the black squares are the confirmed squares across the state, and then probable being purple, possible being light purple. So you can see in southern and central Maine, there's a ton of breeding red-winged blackbirds, and some up in the eastern part of the county, up in the agricultural part, and then kind of scattered about the north woods and down east. Here's a couple more pictures of some of our common breeders. So these would be confirmed breeding codes. That cute little pooping machine on the left is a baby Canada goose, and that's quite an effort gathering nesting material on the right there with that robin, don't you think? I mean, yeah, they didn't want to do multiple trips, I guess. Something. So some of the other common ones, very common ones, some of the most common ones, and that's common by the number of squares that they were confirmed in by people. So grackle, chickadee, starling, tree swallow, gray catbird, osprey, bald eagle. It's really cool to see osprey and bald eagle up there, isn't it? But again, those nests, if there's a nest, you tend to know about it. They're not hidden. They're out there, so that helps with those ones. The that map there is of the gray catbird. It's kind of a similar distribution to the one of the red-winged blackbird. Quite common in southern central Maine and not so much elsewhere in the state. And that picture, I don't know if you could call it an adorable baby bird, that one, but certainly a baby bird is the common grappled baby. That was right at Hutchinson Pond. A couple more of the common birds is a tree swallow actually in its reef. We usually see them in nest boxes, like at Files Arboretum or something. And the common yellow-throat carrying food back to a nest. Tasty little, I don't know what that is, caterpillar, some sort of thing. Are there any entomologists in the room? Can I identify that? All right, let's get to the least common ones, at least according to the Atlas. Ones were confirmed in one single block out of 106 in Kennebec County. Obviously, they're not the least common. The least common would be 0, but these ones are very uncommon. So this is the Carolina wren. This guy kept me occupied during the worst part of COVID when we couldn't leave our homes. It was the first year that they had come into the area, at least our house in Hallowell. So that was really nice to be able to watch them build nests and have kids and all. And you can see how they're distributed against the state. They're mostly in south coastal Maine, but they made their way up into the interior a little bit there, up to about just north of Bangor. Some more green-winged teal was only confirmed once. American bittern, they're in the center just once. And least bittern, did people even know we have least bitterns in the county? That's a super secretive one. There's probably more than one, but the American bitterns are pretty secretive, and the least bitterns are so much more secretive. I've only ever seen them, I think, twice in the last 25 years. Once was up at Torcy Pond, a nature preserve. I don't have a decent picture from Kennebec County. This one's actually from Essex Woods in Bangor, that one on the lower right there. But they're pretty widely distributed in their habitat, at least the American bitterns. The least bitterns, well, I don't think anyone really knows how many there are, but not nearly as many. But they're very hard to confirm, those American bitterns. That's why you don't see many black squares. There, you see mostly purple squares. Probable breeding. This may be the single most interesting bird, arguably, during the Atlas. It's a cross between a red-shouldered hawk and a red-tailed hawk. And the reason we found this, it's just one of those things. It's just a happenstance event. I was leading a bird walk up at Fieldstone Gardens in Vassalboro, and they knew they had a breeding hawk, but they didn't know what it was. And I said, "Oh yeah, let's take the group, let's go and see it." And we went there, and I said, "Yeah, I have no idea what that is." But luckily, Louis Bevere did know what it was, and he was pretty excited about it. And so we watched it for a while. It was the only one confirmed in the state of Maine in this entire 5-year period, was the one up in Vassalboro. So it's not a common thing. That's an adult in the upper left. That was the first picture that I got of it there in the upper left. And then we tried to follow it for a couple of years, and that's one of the juveniles in the lower right there. It's not easy. You had to kind of lit between the trees and around, up over a rock, and pretty well hidden. And it's high up, so normally you could just see a head in the nest, and you couldn't even tell what type of hawk it was. Some more least common ones is a yellow-throated vireo, kind of like a blue-headed vireo. Maybe someone sprayed with a little bit of yellow on the head. They're a rare breeder in Maine. They tend to like silver maple floodplain forests, like out on the Androscoggin River Delta. And that's where those two black spots are, kind of on the border of Kennebec and Androscoggin County there that you see. Purple martins, people who are into birding know that there's a great spot to see them up in Belgrade when they come back every year, right near Hammond Lumber. In fact, one of the nest boxes they have is a miniature of the Hammond Lumber building that they put up on the posts. That's people that live there. It's a private house, but the people don't mind if you pull up on the side of the road and stare at their birdhouses. Another unusual breeder that is on a Kennebec Land Trust property is the Louisiana water thrush that you can find along Vaughan Stream in Vaughan Woods. It was the first one found, I don't know, it was like 25 years ago in Vaughan Woods. It's a southern breeder. It's an infrequent breeder in southern and just barely makes it up to here in central Maine. And they go up and down. They go up and down Vaughan Stream constantly in the breeding season, picking things up out of the water or the rocks and wood and stuff. Very similar to a northern water thrush. The northern water thrush is like the flat water. These guys like, at least in New England, like the fast water. There's probably more of them out there. I know there's at least a few more that were seen in the area, but there's probably more. One of my favorite birds, people who know me, is the red crossbill. I've done a lot of work looking for them across the state. And a couple of years ago, when we had a big white pine mask year, they were breeding all around here, all throughout southern and central Maine. It was really exciting if you're into red crossbills. They're a really interesting species. Their bill is actually crossed, and it makes it more efficient for them to pry apart cones to eat the seeds inside. They stick their tongue in after they've opened them up and eat them. You can see the top of these pine cones where this young male is kind of like he's a juvenile, just starting to get his adult colors, has pried open the scales. Another rare one, the only place I know in Kennebec County where you can see it is a Vesper sparrow, that one on the lower right. If you go up to the Blueberry Barrens on top of Vienna Mountain in June, you'll have a good chance of hearing and seeing it. There's too many interesting ones to talk about there. I'm going to highlight a couple of them. The chimney swift, which we found breeding across the street, basically in the chimneys. Breeds, it was confirmed in Waterville. It's probably breeding in Gardner and Augusta as well. But Wesley LaPointe took these pictures in 2014. These gorgeous pictures of the black terns, the juvenile, little tiny juvenile there in the middle, and the adult over on the right there. This one I think is interesting. It's more of a northern bog breeder, but Sydney Bog, Great Sydney Bog in Sydney obviously is a place where they are. I think that's one of the most unique and underappreciated natural areas in Kennebec County. There's really no good access there, but during the Bird Atlas, we were willing to tromp through water and brushes and rip our jackets and stuff like that to get in there. A beautiful warbler. Some other interesting birds, the beautiful black-Burnian warbler. They're normally in the tops of trees. They're kind of hard to see in breeding season. Around here, they really like the hemlock trees, hemlock groves, and you can find them breeding at Parker Headland and Vaughan Woods and I'm sure other places. They breed all across the state, but they rely on the larger areas. It's not central to their breeding abundance in this part of the state, but we do get them here. The green heron, that was one of the most curious places where I was able to confirm a bird species in Kennebec County. Up at Maine General on their new campus, they have those ponds that they did for runoff and presumably environmental mitigation now, and the green herons like it there. So if you go up there and stand in that little kids playground just on the south side of the big parking lot in June, you can probably see them. I haven't looked in the last couple of years, but they're probably still there. These two in the lower right are young ones. You can see that fuzzy down on top of their heads. Okay, so let's move to the second part of the talk. Does anybody need to stretch or anything or wait back up? You think everybody doing good? Okay. This is a flow chart. I don't like flow charts, but it seemed appropriate here as to how we started out on this study. And I did this analysis along with Ashton Wesner and Aaron Rhodes, and Ashton is out here. Ashton wouldn't mind standing up and being recognized. Scared. But that the picture that I showed on that first slide, it's Charles Wilson. He was a graduate of Colby College, and I don't actually know when he graduated, but 1870s, I think. Um, you can tell he was from that mustache and that dress. It's an older picture, but they've got to come back, or people have got to be going back to this mustache or the great mustache right there. No, I don't know about the bow tie. I'm not convinced with the bow ties. Anyway, and he went on. He wasn't known professionally for his birds as his career moved on. He was known for parasitic copepods, which shows one of his really beautiful drawings there in the upper drawing there. He's got whole books of these. He was a national expert on maybe even internationally known on parasitic copepods. But one thing he did when he was at Colby, just after the time he was tutoring, he kept a list of the breeding birds in Waterville, and that's a piece of that there that we have that I'm showing there. The it was in the Colby archives, and it was forgotten about for 130 years until Aaron Rhodes, who's an archives education librarian at Colby, dug it up. And Aaron works with Ashton, and she showed it to Ashton, um, and Ashton showed it to me, and we got excited about comparing the birds from the 1890s to the 2020s. How often do you get a chance to do that? It was really exciting if you're into that kind of thing. Uh, but as Howard, I'm a hydrologist by training. I don't have any formal training in biology or ecology or anything like that. But I do have some training in data analysis. I've been doing that for a long time, and I really like looking in to see what the stories can tell from the data. And this fit into what Ashton does and Aaron does. So it was really neat that we were able to work on this. So how have things changed and what's behind those changes? This picture is a picture of a print of a painting of Hallowell from 1878. Those old bird's eye view, which just amazed me how anyone could do those back before drones and such. But you can see from the landscape, if you look behind the houses, you don't see many trees there. There's a lot of agriculture. I don't know how accurate this is, but I think it's a good example. There was a lot more farmland. We know that there's a lot more farmland and left fewer trees back then. And so we're able to compare that to the Bird Atlas, the extensive Bird Atlas data. By the way, all those maps that I showed you, you can find those all online in eBird Explorer, the Maine Bird Atlas. You can look at the distributions of every species that was in the Bird Atlas. Do you notice the sailing ships and the steamships down there in the Kennebec? Isn't that neat, that transitional time? So the 1890s, I talked about Charles Wilson. We're also lucky to have another source, another good source from the 1890s, Ora Knight. He was up at UMaine, so I'm a UMaine graduate, so I particularly like that. But Ora Knight was an assistant in natural history. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but it doesn't sound like a very high level thing. But he did this amazing book. He calls it a list of the birds of Maine, but it's much more than a list. This thing's 160 pages long. And there's county level data in there. And the data there for every species from Kennebec County was put together by the Gardner branch of the United Ornithologists of Maine. It's not great. Shouldn't we have another Gardner branch of the United Ornithologists of Maine? And I don't know if this was progressive for his time, but it seems to me it probably was. It was both men and women on that. 6 women and 15 men made up there's 21 people. There's actually 2 people with initials too. I didn't know if they were male or female, but yeah, it seemed like a great group. It'd be really interesting to find out more about them. Okay, this is the quiz part of the presentation. Charles Wilson's list has names that we don't use anymore, common names that we don't use anymore, and some scientific names that we don't use anymore as well. So I'm going to ask you each one of these what bird they are, what species they are, and everyone just shout out an answer. So pigeon woodpecker. Any guesses as to what the pigeon woodpecker is? I heard pileated. No, that's not it. No, flicker. So who said flicker? Yeah, flicker is correct. This one's a little easier, I think. The eave swallow. What do you think the eave swallow is? It's not the barn swallow. Cliff swallow. Yeah, Yeah, and I do like eaves. How about the grass finch? This one's a difficult one. I never would have got this. Oh, isn't it a sparrow? Oh, sparrows. Yeah, you're getting closer. Yeah, it's that Vesper sparrow. Yeah. The Peabody bird, people think about the sounds of birds, can probably pick up on. Yeah, Beethoven's great. I think everybody got that one. Yeah, it's just called the Peabody bird. How about the snowbird? I thought this was snow bunting at first, but it worked. Yes, junco. Very good read. And the extra credit question, the bottom photo is from an Augusta Birding Club trip to a Kennebec County property last year, looking for nightjars, whippoorwills, and such. Anybody guess where that is? Yeah, Surrey Hill. Who said Surrey Hill? Good job, Diana. All right, so this is the only table I'm going to put in here, so just bear with me briefly. So this old data and the new data is completely different. So how are we going to compare the two? The old one are lists of how abundant birds are in different categories. The new stuff is just a huge amount of data. So I had to come up with a way to look at them together. And even the categories of data are a little bit different between Wilson and Knight. I like the tolerably common, and also Knight had one. There was a between common and abundant. He had a quite common, so that's somewhere in attainment. So how to compare that to the new stuff? I looked at the percentage of blocks that had probable or confirmed evidence for each species. And then I picked these categories as to how rare that would be. So the first one, rare categories, so that'd be roughly 6 blocks out of 106 of the total blocks we had in Kennebec County. So made those the categories and came up with 4 categories that put everything into, so could compare them between the two. So because that's because of the data, generally we required categories to be 2 categories apart, like rare to common or something like that, in order to say that we're pretty confident in the changes. And going by that, there were 14 species that were less abundant over the last 130 years, 38 that were similar, and 32 that are more abundant. And I'm going to get into more of these in detail. So it's a little bit confusing. You have lots of ones going up, lots of ones going down. About twice as many going up, and lots staying the same. But when we divided up the birds by their primary breeding habitat, that became more clear what was going on and why. Does everybody know what that bird is in the upper right? Yeah, black-billed cuckoo. I took that picture about 15, 20 years ago, and I've never been able to get one that good again because they're a really skulky bird. Yeah, how about that owl? Any guesses as to what that juvenile owl is that kind of blends into the tree there, that pine tree? Yeah, great one. Lionel got it. You've seen these before. Yeah, there was 2 of them in the nest. I think the one of them was kind of leaning over the top of the other one in this picture. So the grassland birds, there was only 3 grassland birds that we were able to look at between the old period and the new period. Both of these pictures came from Kennebec Land Trust North Acres property, which Deb and Trudy were so gracious to donate. It's an amazing birding area if you hadn't been there. I think I saw 100 bird species there over the last year. Yeah. Thanks, Deb and Trudy. It's a great spot. So what's happening with birds? Vesper sparrows going down. There's not as many Vesper sparrows as there used to be. Probably related to a lot fewer farms and overgrown fields and such. A little bit surprising, bobolink seems to be about the same. They're still relatively common in Kennebec County, even though they generally over the last 50 years have declined. Eastern meadowlarks, I think, is even more of a surprise. I think a lot of people know that they're decreasing over time. And they decreased from 1966, from 2022, according to the breeding bird data, which is the gold standard for how birds are doing. But they weren't noted as a breeding bird even in the 1890s. They didn't seem to be around here in the 1890s. And apparently by mid-century, according to Palmer in his 1949 Birds of Maine, they expanded their breeding range of Maine in the early 1900s. So they weren't here, then there's a bunch of them. Now they're declining, but there's still few around, including in North Ecos. Shrubland birds. I think shrublands are probably less appreciated as a habitat as grasslands, just from what I hear people talk about. But there's a cohort of birds that really like the shrubby, thick kind of early successional growth. And there's fewer field sparrows over time. There's fewer brown thrashers. There's fewer black-billed cuckoos. But 7 of the species are about the same. We had more chestnut-sided warblers, and 3 species have expanded into our area: towhees, eastern towhees, prairie warbler, and northern cardinal. That's a that's a brown thrasher in the upper right there, and that's a prairie warbler in the lower. I think that's my favorite picture of the entire breeding bird atlas. That prairie warbler bringing lunch back to the kids there. Open woodlands and residential areas. Some birds kind of like the open woods, and residential areas often kind of mimic an open woods. There's fewer dark-eyed juncos, fewer white-throated sparrows. A lot of the species are similar. There's more purple finches, and there's been some birds that have either colonized or recolonized this area, including merlin, house finch, wild turkey, and mourning dove. I think mourning doves is a prize to be. Well, we think they've been here forever, but they weren't here in the 1890s, essentially. Mature forest. This is the one where we had the most increases. There were no species of the ones that we looked at that decreased over time, decreased in abundance categories. There's 9 species that were similar between the 1890s and the present. And then black-burny warbler, pileated woodpecker, scarlet tanned, or pine warbler. They're all pretty common now, but they're all rare breeders in the 1890s. Just weren't as many trees, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. Range expansions, wood thrush. Who knew that wood thrush didn't breed in Maine in the 1890s? Anybody know that? Hey, no. I just always think of them always being around. Winter wren, red-bellied woodpecker. I think people know the red-bellied woodpecker is pretty new, along with tufted titmouse. Blue-headed vireo's one I didn't know was different. That one in the lower right, isn't that a yummy-looking spider that he's got there in the lower right there? And that's in the upper right, that's a baby wood thrush from near Shed Pond in Manchester. So birds that rely on water in wetlands. There's likely fewer spotted sandpipers, and I'm not really sure what's going on there. That'd be an interesting one to look into. 4 species that were similar, and then either range expansions or recolonization by a number of species, including Canada goose. That was basically extirpated from the state and reintroduced. Hooded mergans or mallard, ringneck duck, bald eagle. That's a well-known success story. Sandhill crane, that one in the middle there, in the fields next to Torcy Pond, with that's a juvenile in front of the adult. Marsh wren, that's another one I didn't realize didn't used to be here. They came in mid-century, as far as I know. And northern water thrush. Those are any guesses as to what those baby ducks at the bottom are? Oh, very good. Yeah. Again, there's merglings, I like to call them. I don't know if that's a real word. Are there any ornithologists here? Okay, good. I can call them merglings. That's on the top picture, that's a spotted sandpiper. Took that going down the Kennebec River. There was a bunch of them along the Kennebec River between Sydney and Augusta. Aerial insectivores, that's a species that's well known, a group of species that are well known to be declining over time. Nighthawk, cliff swallow, chimney swift, bank swallow, barn swallow are all down in numbers, or likely down in numbers since the 1890s. Those are bank swallows in the upper right there. It's a sand pit kind of on the Vassalboro Waterville line. Purple martin and whippoorwill seem to be similar, from the data we have anyway. There's probably more tree swallows around, and that may be due to all the nest boxes everyone's got up. And northern rough-winged swallow didn't used to breed here. That's one that's expanded its range. That's 2 juveniles of the northern rough-winged swallows there on the lower picture. Also along the Kennebec River, actually the same day I got the picture of the spotted sandpiper. Shell Ring and I were canoeing down the river looking for breeding birds. It was a great thing to be doing during COVID. We couldn't do anything else anyway, and it was awesome doing it. So what's behind all the bird abundance changes? I think you can probably guess. Land use changes seems to be a major part of it. In these two pictures show satellite views from 1939 from the Department of Transportation, and a Google satellite screen capture from 2025. So in addition to going from black and white to color, which is convenient for being able to date them, you can see there's a lot more woods in the one on the right in the newer photo. It's not always, but a lot more woods. That's the Kennebec River going down there. We're looking at parts of Waterville in the northeast part there, and Vassalboro and Sydney. You can see the highway didn't exist in the early pictures. I always wonder if those pictures were actually from initial survey, trying to figure out a route for the highway that they put in. So shrubland birds there. Has there been a decrease in shrubland over time? It's really hard to say because we don't, or at least I don't know of data that would say one or the other how shrubland has increased, decreased over time. But another possible factor is that we have new shrubland birds, and are the new shrubland birds, are they competing with the older shrubland birds? And again, it's a question, it's not an answer. But we do know that the peak of farms in Kennebec County in 1870, according to one Kirshner from 2008, and yes, it is the same Teresa Kirshner, a paper that she did related to the Bessie farmers, Teresa. Yeah. I really wanted to get that in. Yeah, that's a really cool paper. So presumably there was a lower abundance of shrubland prior to the major farming period, and there's clearly less now. So maybe that was an abnormal people also in shrubland birds in the 1890s. The mature forest, well, that's the one, the category that really stuck out, or one of them. The species either increased or changed the same, and we know based on data from Lloyd Ireland, he put together, he compiled all the historical data he could find on forested acreage in Kennebec County and across the state. And from that, we know that the forested acreage went up from like 160,000 acres to like 410,000 acres. It's like 150% increase. That's a lot more forested acreage. And I think it shows up in the data for the birds that we have more abundant on birds that depend on mature forest. This is a juvenile broadwing hawk behind a private residence in Sydney, kind of looking down at the nest, kind of just making out of the nest, still waiting for food from parents, not leaving the nest area. But you can see the big trees there, which they like. It's the most common woodland hawk we have around here. So the range expansions, isn't that interesting? I thought this was one of the more interesting things. 25 species that we have now breeding in Kennebec County were not known to breed in the 1890s by Wilson or Knight. Some of them have been in recent decades, some are earlier. More recent ones I think that people may be more aware of are prairie warbler. They've really specialized in the shrubby areas, especially along power lines that moved up into Maine, southern Maine and some terrain. Merlins, red-bellied woodpeckers. I think most people know red-bellied woodpeckers are pretty new. Tufted titmice, sandhill cranes are all pretty new. The first documented ones in Maine breeding were in Kennebec County out at Missalinski Marsh about 20, 30 years ago. And then in earlier decades, as I mentioned, mourning dove came in, marsh wren came in, northern rough-winged swallow. This map on the right is a photo of page of a warbler guide that I had showing the 1996 known range for prairie warbler. So you can see it just barely makes it into south coastal Maine 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Time goes fast. So what's behind the range expansions? For the southern birds that like residential habitats like red-bellied woodpeckers, cardinals, it's probably about a combination of nearly continuous urban or suburban habitat coming from the south, which you can see on this map, which is actually from a hydrological report I did on what's behind why things are flooding, increasing that flooding. Those red areas, those are urban areas. The pink areas are kind of suburban areas. But you can see a kind of continuous line. And it is warmer now than it was 100 years ago. Air temperatures are up like about 2.5 degrees in the summer and about 5 degrees in the winter. And that helps with overwinter survival, obviously. Another thing that helps with overwinter survival are bird feeders, which is really good to the residential ground and more people feeding birds. But the birds are not just expanding from the south, they've been coming from the west or the north or both. Sandhill crane came from the Midwest when populations expanded. Merlin came from the north. They figured out how to live in suburban urban areas. They breed in Hallowell, they breed in Gardner, they breed in Augusta. I'm sure they breed around Waterville as well too. Have people seen them breed around Waterville as well? It's a maybe. They probably are. What's behind those population expansions? Probably population increases and adapting to new habitats. The aerial insectivores, what's going on with those? You're going to be hearing more about the nightjars from Logan Parker next week, but it's swallows, swifts, and nightjars. Several that have apparently declined since the 1890s. Based on what I could see in the scientific literature, people aren't really sure exactly why that is, and maybe a combination of things, but there seems to be a lack of conclusive evidence as to exactly why their populations are going down in a troubling way. But it may be related to issues on their migratory routes or in their wintering areas. And here's an example of one of our long distance migrants, the chimney swift. We see them flying around Hallowell, and we think of them as our birds, but they're wintering in South America, a very different set of challenges down there. But there's really not, as I understand, there's really not the data to support really figuring out what's going on the migration or on the wintering grounds. So water and wetland birds, that's another success story, I think. There's a lot of birds related to water that are increasing, and a lot of that is due to wildlife protection. No more indiscriminate hunting, reforesting along rivers and things like that. The hooded merganser is a really interesting case. It's benefited from recovering beaver populations, from reforestation, from nest box programs, probably more intended for wood ducks, but they use boxes as well. And that's a male hooded merganser there on the right with this crust up at Shed Pond in Manchester. Well, I think the bald eagle recovery is really well known. That's a real conservation success story. And in addition to regulations that helped it, it's got a lot of big pines that it can nest in now. I was able to find an account from the late 1800s out of Saginaw County where a guy who wrote the article grew up there, and basically all of the white pine trees he used to climb for bald eagle nests had been cut down by the time he wrote the article. So there's a real shortage of nesting locations. But he was also collecting eggs from the nests, so that probably was he did here. So anyway, believe it or not, that's kind of a summary of what's going on rather than all the details. We have a lot more detail in the article that we've written, myself and Ashton and Aaron, and that's going to be coming out in the Maine Natural History Observer in the spring issue this year. And if you're into natural history articles by Maine writers, mostly amateurs, some professionals, really interesting subjects, not just birds. It's hard for me to believe this subject is as interesting as birds that other people think there are. And it's not just birds, it covers a lot of ground, but there is a substantial amount of bird information in there. It's an inexpensive membership to the Maine Natural History Observatory, and you support education and research work they do, including work by Logan Parker, who lives locally, and he's going to be talking about nightjar research next week. So yeah, it's really interesting articles in there, and not just because mine are in there. So what's going to happen in the future? Sure, no, it's a lot harder to predict the future than it is to predict the past. Things are really complex and affected by multiple things. And also, as I pointed out earlier, not everything that affects breeding birds right in our area here is under local control. These birds migrate to everywhere in the southeastern U.S., Central America, South America. But some is under local control. And conserving local habitats. The birds need a place to live. Different birds need different habitats. And does anybody know an organization around here that's done a lot of local conservation? Yeah, the Kennebec Land Trust. It's an organization. It's a wonderful organization. Both everyone who works there, Teresa and everybody else, and its board and volunteers have done so much good work over the years. And since 1988, have conserved over 8,000 acres on how many properties is it now, Teresa? Yeah, so it's like 80 properties overall, conserved 78. Yeah, it's a lot of properties with a lot of different habitat. That's a field sparrow on the upper right there. They like the shrubby habitat. That's a cool looking sparrow, I think. And that's a barred owl. I think a lot of people would recognize that in the lower photo. And coincidentally, if you want to help now with conservation, there happens to be a conservation campaign going on around Shed Pond, and I wanted to tie it into the birds. You know, conservation is obviously important for a lot of reasons and for a lot of different plants and animals, but I'm going to focus on the birds. And large fragmented forested areas are particularly important, and some of the most threatened in our area, large areas. And birds like scarlet tanager in the upper left and black-birdie and warbler in the upper right depend on those. So there's a current campaign, but it's to conserve those blocks in the yellow outline on the south side of there to add 90 acres or so to make it almost 1,000 acre conservation area, which is really amazing in our area. Not every, one of the things I didn't mention is that if the two older sources didn't agree, we didn't add it. And there's a couple other reasons we didn't add birds. So we didn't do every bird that's breeding around here, but yeah, I don't actually know what this because I didn't look at them. But yeah, they're an unusual breeder up here, more southern bird, and they are breeding here now. Yeah. Loons, everybody loves loons. I think that was one of the ones, if I recall, that the two old sources just didn't agree on the abundance, so we didn't include it in the study. So I can't tell you what's happening, but I can tell you they're quite common. They were quite common documented breeding birds in Kennebec County. Pretty much every lake and pond has at least one pair of loons on it. Yeah, I was going to mention that. Thanks for bringing it up. Yeah, the black terns, they're out of Messalonsky Marsh. So if you can stop by the old boat ramp that they closed because of the milfoil on Route 27, just south of Hammond Lumber. And if you have a spotting scope, you might see the best way to do it, though, is to get in a canoe or kayak and paddle out into the marsh in June, and you're going to see them out there. It's really a special bird. And then when you're up that way, you can drive by and see the purple martins. It's a really good question, and most respectable ornithologists would tell you really can't look at changes in abundance this way because we're looking at categories. It's really a pretty rough measure, but it's the best we could do with our older data. The really good data is the breeding bird survey data, which uses consistent methods and consistent routes and counts actually the number of birds along certain routes, the same routes every year, and they have trends, but those only go back to 1966. So yeah, you're absolutely right. You can have a difference between essentially the frequency of occurrence and the abundance. Yeah, and I've just been calling them abundance with the categories of abundance, but it's probably not technically correct. The answer is really the recent Bird Atlas, the 1998 to 2018 to 2022 Bird Atlas. That data was collected using a ton of forethought and quality control and standardized methods, a massive number of volunteers, a ton of spatial definition. So by having that, we have a really good kind of baseline to look at abundance going forward, and that's the way people do it going forward. We did have a breeding bird atlas in the 1970s, but it was kind of a little bit more of a seat of the pants type of thing. They still did really good work and had great volunteers out there, but it was a much smaller effort and rougher the coverage wasn't as good, wasn't as detailed. So as Adrian mentioned last week, they were able to do comparisons between the 1970s Breeding Bird Atlas and the most recent one, which was really cool, but doesn't go back as far. You know how it is. It's a trade-off between how far back you go and how much data you have.